Diese Episode wird dir präsentiert von Brain Effect. Du kennst Brain Effect bestimmt schon, denn der Gründer Fabian Völsch war schon 3-mal in meiner Show. Hör mal rein in seine Episoden zum Thema kognitive Leistungsfähigkeit, Nootropics und CBD-Öl. Heute präsentiere ich dir das hochwertige C8 MCT-Öl von Brain Effect. Damit kannst du zum Beispiel den weltberühmten Bulletproof Coffee machen. Ich selber benutze es für Low-Carb-Desserts, meinen Wildkräuterpudding oder als schnelle Energiequelle fürs Gehirn. Manchmal trinke ich es auch direkt aus der Flasche. Das C8-Öl kann vom Körper gleich in Ketonkörper umgewandelt werden. Dadurch ist auch eine milde Ketose jenseits der ketogenen Diät möglich. Die Vorteile sind mehr Konzentration und weniger Heißhunger. Und das Beste ist, als Hörer von Bio360 bekommst du auf das C8 MCT-Öl und die anderen Produkte von Brain Effect satte 20% Rabatt mit dem Gutscheincode Bio360. Folge dem Link in der Beschreibung oder in den Shownotes. Und du tust nicht nur dir etwas Gutes, sondern unterstützt auch noch diesen Podcast und hilfst mit, dass es ihn auch in Zukunft noch geben wird. Bio360. Zurück ins Leben. Komm mit mir auf eine Reise. Eine Reise zu mehr Energie und fantastischer Gesundheit. Ich möchte dir das Wissen und den Mut vermitteln, den ich gebraucht hätte, als ich ganz unten war. Dabei will ich dir helfen, wieder richtig in deine Energie zu kommen. Zurück ins Leben. Hello and welcome to the Bio360 podcast. This is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Paul Saladino. Hi, Paul.
Hey.
We're talking about the carnivore diet and we're talking about meat here. We just talked about mTor and IGF-1 and the difference in triggers like leucine and insulin. And I have some more questions about meat. Like there is some typical concerns about meat. For example, the creation of a ton of ammonia. So if you eat a lot of meat, you're creating ammonia and that is toxic. Isn't that going through the roof on a carnivore diet?
Well, in the first portion of the podcast, we talked a little bit about how much meat to eat on a carnivore diet. I think that a lot of people have different versions of how to eat a carnivore diet. From what I can tell, it's not evolutionarily consistent to eat 3 to 4 pounds or multiple kilograms of meat per day. I think our ancestors would have favored the fat and eaten organ meats in addition to muscle meat. And so I do think there is a nuanced conversation about how much protein to eat on a carnivore diet. And I think that for some people, eating too much protein can be a bad thing. In what I would consider to be my ideal version of a carnivore diet, I'm not urging people to overeat protein. Most of us can do what is called the urea cycle in the liver. This is where the liver has a series of enzymatic reactions and uses nitrogenous compounds, amino acids, which are converted into urea, a water-soluble form for nitrogen excretion. It is possible to overwhelm the liver's ability to do that conversion, in which case the nitrogenous compounds might spill over into ammonia in the blood. And that would be a very bad thing, in my opinion. There are some pretty elegant papers that have been published in the past talking about the mean rate of urea excretion. And there are tables which people can look at. There is some genetic variability in terms of our upper limit for protein consumption. And I think that if someone were going to construct a carnivore diet exclusively out of meat, they could certainly exceed their mean rate of urea excretion being the ceiling for that, in which case that would not be a good thing. But I'll be very clear that the way I construct a carnivore diet, the way I would recommend people construct a carnivore diet, the way that I think our ancestors would have eaten, would not have even come close to that. So people are probably asking, how much protein should I eat? I'll clarify this. I'm not saying low protein. I'm just not saying crazy high protein. When I'm constructing a carnivore diet with a client or a patient, I usually have them aim for about 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight. So that may be we can convert that into kilograms, et cetera, et cetera.
2 grams per kilogram.
Yeah, perhaps something like that, or a little bit less. Yeah. And so that's not an excessive amount of protein. And that protein intake includes organ meats, muscle meats, etc. So I weigh 170 pounds. I'm 5'10". I believe that's about 75 kilograms. So for me, I'm aiming for about 130 to 140 grams of protein per day. And that's not an excessive amount when we think that...
So much. I wonder if I exceed that with my one meal per day, because I don't have the trimmings and stuff. I use a lot of rendered fat, but I wanted to ask you, like, how you compose it. I mean, you already told it in the beginning, but I find it hard to find really the fatty cuts and all that. I mean, I really try, but there's not so much fat around, actually. I go to the butcher and I'm like, oh my God, it's all lean stuff. And I have all the organs that I can get my hand on, but... it's not so easy to get a lot of fat.
Well, that's the key, though, is getting a lot of fat. Trimmings, suet. Yeah, I think that's what people need to do if they want to construct a carnivore diet well, is find a place they can get good fat. That's the key. So yeah, I'm not eating a ton of protein. I do think that you can exceed it. There are others who construct carnivore diets just eating ribeye steaks all day, and I think in that case you could exceed the liver's ability to do the urea cycle, but that's not the goal. I don't think excess protein is beneficial to our bodies. I think protein is used primarily as a building block, and that either fat or carbohydrates, clearly in mine and perhaps your opinion, fat is the preferred fuel, but fat or carbohydrates are what our bodies run on. And on a carnivore diet, we're not eating any carbohydrates, so we're trying to emphasize fat. Fat is fuel, protein is building blocks.
Okay, so 2 grams. McCullough, and he promoted like the work of Ron Rosedale. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he talks about that, and they say like 0.6 to maximum 0.8 grams of protein a day per kilograms in lean body mass, and otherwise you will activate mTor, and that was the whole argument, and so. Yeah.
And I think Dr. Mercola has changed his views on that a little bit,
Thanks,
and it's not about. Yeah, it's not that we're trying to not activate mTor. We're fine. Activate mTor all you want. Just don't do it all day.
Yeah, I mean, he's already on that bandwagon with his kind of the new version of fasting. He came along with keto fasting, how he calls it. He's already in that thing of like, okay, we want to activate it, but then we also want to get out of it,
Which makes sense, yeah, and I appreciate very much Dr. Mercola's sort of openness to new ideas. He's a great guy.
Yeah, that's really great. And also I saw that you actually changed your mind, and which I also do. For example, you were talking about the toxicity of vitamin A in liver, and then apparently you changed your mind. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I was ever talking about the toxicity of vitamin A, but
you have recommended to be very cautious, and then a month later or so, I heard you talk on that you have no concerns anymore.
Yeah. So there was a phase in the very beginning of my experimentation with the carnivore diet, which was over a year ago, where I went down the rabbit hole of vitamin A toxicity. And, I'm kind of going back around on vitamin A. I don't think anyone knows about this vitamin. I looked into the work of the people who were saying that vitamin A was frankly toxic and that we should totally avoid it. And I think that is false. I don't think there's any evidence that we should be avoiding vitamin A. Vitamin A is not toxic to humans. The question then becomes, can too much vitamin A from animal sources be a problem? It's pretty clear that too much vitamin A from supplements may not be a good thing. And I actually don't recommend anyone take a vitamin A supplement ever. I think we should only be getting vitamin A from animal foods. And there are some interesting studies in monogastric animals, specifically pigs, to suggest that vitamin A is absorbed and used in the body a little differently when it comes from a vitamin A palmitate supplement and when it comes from food. We don't know in humans, but there is a significant amount of literature out there cautioning people from overconsumption of vitamin A, both from supplements and animal foods. And so I think that it's an ongoing area of research and questioning how much liver per week is ideal and what happens if we overeat vitamin A. I did an experiment for myself where I ate quite a bit of liver for months and months at a time and didn't suffer any negative consequences. And as a physician in the States, I check my blood work very regularly, and I check it in very high detail with many different sort of labs, and I didn't see any abnormalities that would suggest a vitamin A problem. You can check serum levels of vitamin A.
I had a ton of liver, and I love liver pate. So this is one of my staple foods because that's actually 50% fat. So it's, it's something that I carry around with me.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at calcium levels, you can look at serum calcium, you can look at blood levels of vitamin A, you can look at other things, and it doesn't seem to be bad. For months and months, I was eating 4 to 5 ounces of liver per day. And so it's been an experiment. I think that the main concern with liver is pregnant women. There were some studies in the past that overconsumption of vitamin A was associated, it's not linked causally, but was associated with an increased incidence of birth defects. And we don't want that. And so, but that was pretty high vitamin A exposures in those people, probably from supplements. But those studies can't really sort out whether that's from a supplement or from liver. So what I would think as I learned through this, and you're right, any sort of these explorations is humbling because we always learn and sometimes have to change our minds. The way I feel about it now is we should be eating organ meats in reasonable quantities that we might have been obtaining from animals, and maybe in somewhat congruent proportions to the way they occur in animals. So over the course of a day, I'll eat, like I said, I might eat a pound of muscle meat or a little less than a pound of muscle meat, and I might have 3 or 4 ounces of organ meats total. Maybe for me, a little like an ounce or 2 of liver, a few ounces of kidney, maybe spleen, I'll rotate it. But I think that if people are eating organ meats throughout the week in reasonable quantities, maybe half a pound of liver per week, a pound of liver per week, half a pound of kidney per week, a pound of kidney per week, that's totally safe. I don't think 8 ounces of liver or a pound of liver per week is going to hurt anyone. I think that we need to do more research. And if somebody wants to eat 5 pounds of liver per week, is that a bad thing? Well, that's not very evolutionarily consistent. And I hope I never came across as recommending that much liver. But yeah.
No, yeah, but I've been actually I'm running out of. I'm going to move soon, so I gotta empty my freezer, and everything that's left is liver. So I have liver every day, like a pound or so. I'm still feeling right.
If you need to empty your freezer, you can just send me your food. I'll eat it for you. Don't worry.
I have all the good sources, man. That's kind of makes me really sad because I have now one guy. He has sheep and he has an ancient race of pigs, and he even slaughters them. I mean, he kills them on the meadow, which in France is actually forbidden, but he doesn't want to send them into the slaughterhouse. And from him, I could get the entire animal, like everything, He really nice guy, super sweet guy.
Sounds amazing.
And I
That's
have
a treasure.
One source. It's actually an English couple. They used to be vegetarians for 15 years, and they call themselves grass punk. And so I get all the beef stuff from them, and all the tallow and the bones and everything. Yeah, now I'm going to move to the coast like you did, and so I got to search for some new sources. Okay, one more question. I feel a little bit pressed because I have so many questions, and the really interesting ones, they come in the end. So one more question towards the meat, and then we jump to the plants. How is protein actually digested? Because I have been a raw vegan myself, and what is then often said, this is like the meat is going to ferment, to ferment in the gut and everything. Like, how is that actually working? Is there any truth about that?
No, there's no truth to that. People will say, "Oh, the meat is rotting in your gut."
Exactly.
Look, humans have been eating meat for millions of years. Meat, that is just frankly inaccurate. Meat is not rotting in your gut. Meat is digested the way it's always been. It goes into the stomach, which is hopefully extremely acidic. Humans have a very acidic stomach relative to primates, also suggesting adaptations for meat eating or animal eating. And there it's broken down into amino acid components, and then it goes into the small bowel where it mixes with bile and pancreatic enzymes.
Okay, so who comes up with these kind of tales?
I think that it's people in the plant-based movements and vegan movements who are looking, they probably believe it and they are trying to help people. I just think they're misled and misguided. So, and if people have other questions, about the claims regarding meat, I've talked about these on many podcasts in the past. On my website, which is carnivoremd.com, people can find a list of all the podcasts that I've been on to this point. I think it's about 60. at this point. And going through those podcasts, they'll find many discussions of why meat doesn't cause colon cancer, why meat doesn't cause heart disease. On my own podcast, I've done many discussions of lipids and cholesterol with multiple brilliant guests. I talked about ApoE4 on my podcast. So there's a big, big library. We can't ever cover it all. And I want to get to all of your good questions, but just so people know, there's a huge library that's linked on my website of my podcast, of podcasts that I've been on. And we go into all of this in detail. And in a few months, my book will be out, which will have it all in paper as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, there's a couple of topics we really don't need to talk about because you have done it in a brilliant way. You talked about LDL and stuff like that. That was so complicated. Honestly, I didn't understand anything.
I'll just touch on it for a second for people. And I would recommend that they listen to podcasts that I've done with Tommy Wood, who's an MD, PhD, and Dave Feldman on my podcast, and Nadir Ali, who is an interventional cardiologist. But the notion that LDL is directly toxic to the endothelium of our blood vessels is unsupported. And LDL has many beneficial roles in the human body, immunologic roles. It transports cholesterol. It's crucial. LDL is not what is causing atherosclerosis, but there are things which can raise LDL, like insulin resistance, which are probably the main driving factors for atherosclerosis. And it's not the LDL that's high that's causing it, it's the stickiness of the subendothelial layer in the blood vessels. So a high LDL in the setting of insulin sensitivity is, in my opinion and the opinion of many others, not dangerous and not equivalent to a high LDL in the setting of insulin resistance. So I'll just say that briefly, and people can go into those podcasts for more detail.
Yeah, there's so much about insulin resistance, but we're not going to dive into that. So let's kind of try to compress into like 10 minutes or so the discussion about plants. Like, are plants actually healthy? I mean, we're living in a world for I mean, even myself, for the last 10 years or so, or 20 years, I was completely of the opinion, I'm missing the word here, that plants are healthy, that leafy greens are the stuff that we need to eat. And they're full of vitamins and minerals, and we have vitamin K in kale and all that kind of stuff. And we need to eat raw and as colorful as possible. What are your thoughts about that? You are certainly aware of the fact that our sleep is probably the most important factor when it comes to health and regeneration. A good sleep is key for energy production, detoxification, brain health, and a lot more. The Oura Ring is probably the world's best sleep tracker. It's a tiny little ring that can track your deep sleep, your REM sleep, and even sophisticated parameters like night HRV and body temperature. I was able to identify a couple of sleep-related problems for myself and solve them with the help of the Oura Ring. The ring comes with a built-in airplane mode and does not emit any visible light during the night like some popular wristbands or smartwatches do. I simply love my Oura Ring. And the best part is, listeners of the Virus 360 podcast now get a whopping $50 off. The only thing you got to do is follow the link in the description of the podcast, and the discount will be applied in the final checkout step. Sleep well.
It's wrong. It's just wrong. And I think that the beginning of that investigation is even further back than our evolution. Plants have been around for hundreds of millions of years. I think it's 450 million years. And plants evolved colors to signal to animals when to eat their fruit. So we can go into that. Plants didn't evolve colors to be beneficial for humans. And it's only really within the last few generations that I think the supplement industry and other industries have conflated these ideas, suggesting that the pigments that plants have as colors or other molecules that plants use in their own biochemistry are somehow beneficial for humans. And it doesn't really hold up to academic scrutiny when you look at it, which is the crazy, crazy thing, because that narrative is so ingrained in our culture that plants have all these magical, quote unquote, phytochemical molecules. And there are people like Rhonda Patrick, touting the benefits of sulforaphane, et cetera, et cetera. And every week there's a new plant molecule that someone says, hey, look at this great plant molecule. Isn't it good for humans? And, it just doesn't hold up to academic scrutiny when you look at the research, and I'll tell you why. From an evolutionary perspective, these are molecules that plants are making for plants. Many of these molecules are actually plant defense molecules. They're phytoalexins. They're molecules that plants are making to deter pests, insects, and herbivores from eating the plants. And yet, as humans, we're thinking that these are good for us in some way, that plants are some benevolent creatures that are making these molecules in some evolutionary accident to benefit human biochemistry. Plant biochemistry and human biochemistry look vastly different. This is like taking the parts from a Honda and trying to make them work in a Lexus or a Tesla. It just doesn't work. Every once in a while, by some crazy accident, you might be able to put a Honda part in a Tesla, but it's not the ideal part. And that's what we see. These are different operating systems. Plants and animals are different operating systems. And I think that most of the people doing this research are going into it with too much bias. And they're hoping to see a benefit, but they're losing the forest for the trees. They're losing their perspective. And there certainly are studies out there that from a very myopic perspective, a very zoomed in perspective, show that a plant molecule can do something that could be construed as beneficial in the human body. But you could also make the same argument for a molecule like ibuprofen, or a molecule like metoprolol, or a molecule like any of the pharmaceutical molecules that we use in medicine today. And what's been lost, the perspective that's been lost, is that plant molecules are the same as these pharmaceutical molecules. They're perceived as foreign to our bodies. And what we know, and what is often ignored, invariably ignored, is that foreign molecules always have side effects. And they're not even really side effects. They just have more effects than the one effect that we want to focus on. If I told you that ibuprofen, which is, I don't know, maybe you guys have a different name for this, or Aleve, which is naproxen. Like that, yeah. Ibuprofen. So if I told you ibuprofen is the greatest thing in the world, it's going to take away all your pain, you should take ibuprofen every day, you would say, no, Paul, that's dumb. Like, I know that ibuprofen is going to hurt my stomach. I know that ibuprofen is going to hurt my kidneys. People don't have a problem wrapping their head around the notion that pharmaceutical molecules, quote unquote, are going to have side effects. But when it comes to these plant molecules, we are too quick to forget that these plant molecules are exactly the same. They fit into the exactly same paradigm. They have side effects, which are actually just effects. And no one tells us about the side effects because they want to sell us the plant molecule. The pharmaceuticals in the drug industry are regulated by the FDA. They have to tell us about the side effects. No one has to tell us about the side effects of plant molecules. But if you look at the literature, there's a vast body of literature that gets underemphasized or never talked about regarding plant molecule side effects. So what am I talking about here? You know, things like sulforaphane or even resveratrol are a great illustration of this. Resveratrol was this darling molecule that is produced by plants in response to fungus and in response to insects eating it. So resveratrol is a phytoalexin molecule. It's part of a family called polyphenols. And in lower organisms, worms, mice, frogs, resveratrol looked like it might extend lifespan by improving insulin sensitivity, or, well, perhaps not insulin sensitivity per se, but by affecting a family of genes called the sirtuins. And so researchers went crazy. They had a party, they popped champagne, they said, we're going to make $1 million, we're going to make billions. And except when you look at resveratrol in humans, it failed miserably, and the side effects were never talked about. But still, resveratrol is a multi-million-dollar supplement every year, and yet all the human trials have failed to show any benefit, and the side effects are never talked about. In the human trials with resveratrol, it's shown to decrease androgen precursors, so it's a hormonal mimetic, it's an estrogen mimetic, and resveratrol has been shown to potentially trigger many immunologic functions in a negative way in the human body. So there are these side effects, quote unquote, of these molecules that are never talked about. People just say, take resveratrol, you'll live forever just like worms. Except resveratrol has failed in trials of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It worsened metabolic syndrome, meaning it worsened dysglycemia, it worsened glucose tolerance,
Oh, really?
it decreased androgen precursors and testosterone in humans. And so, but nobody ever talks about these side effects of the plant molecules. And invariably, the plant molecules have side effects. Curcumin is another fantastic example that I'll just, if you indulge me, I'll talk about. Curcumin is also a polyphenol. It's the one in turmeric. And everyone says, oh, curcumin is amazing. It's anti-inflammatory. But curcumin is very similar to molecules like ibuprofen in that, yes, there are some studies which show that curcumin can act to abrogate inflammatory mechanisms in the human body. But at the same time, curcumin has also been shown to have side effects in the human body. And so if you have pain in your toe and you want to take ibuprofen or curcumin, you could take whatever you want. I think that you should figure out what's causing the pain in your toe rather than taking either of those. But they both might work to quell the pain in your toe. And they both are going to have side effects in your human body. And people would say, oh, the side effects of curcumin are much less. And that's where I debate them. Curcumin has been shown to have some pretty significant side effects. In cell culture, it's toxic to both cancer and native cells. It's been shown to affect the way the DNA unwinds and is replicated. Curcumin can affect potassium channels. Curcumin has dangerous side effects in the human body, just like ibuprofen does. And so none of these plant molecules are a free ride. They're just like other pharmaceuticals. They all have side effects.
Yeah, what makes me very suspicious of curcumin is that it's almost not absorbed by the body,
exactly,
naturally.
Exactly.
And so we're trying with piperine and liposomal and micelle technology to kind of like make a Trojan horse and get it into the body. And that is that makes me suspicious because whenever we kind of, as humans kind of outsmart nature, this is usually ending in a catastrophe. So is that kind of the same thing going on there?
Exactly. And so many of these polyphenolic compounds and non-polyphenolic compounds in plants are very poorly absorbed. And you're right, piperine, I've spoken about that before. We're going to great lengths. We're liposomal. We're making curcumin liposomal. And I agree with you. Every time we try and outsmart 4 million years of human evolution, we've failed in the past. Maybe we'll eventually get smart enough and do something amazing, but people need to take this with a grain of salt. And one of my main issues with these plant compounds is we're trying to use them to become optimal, and we don't need to use them to become optimal. There are no plant compounds that do anything in the human body that we can't do without them. And many times, functional medicine practitioners, naturopathic doctors, who I respect greatly, are using them in the same way we would use pharmaceuticals. We're using them as a Band-Aid to ameliorate symptoms without treating the root cause. So we need to go after the root cause. And the root cause is often nutrient insufficiency and inflammation. And as we can talk about, I think that inflammation is coming from other plant molecules like oxalates, lectins, or many of these other molecules in plants that are phytoalexins that are damaging the gut lining. So plants, I think, are causing many of the problems.
Okay. So maybe I try to sum up this second part. You said that plants, they do have some compounds that might be beneficial, but like every plant on the face of the planet comes with other effects, with kind of side effects or different effects that have like a price to pay, let's say. So there are always some negative effects, and there might be even outweigh the actual benefits that we're trying to get from it. And
yeah, I think it's always a net negative. And there are a series of studies to suggest this. There are interventional studies that look at markers of oxidative stress, look at markers of immunologic activation, look at markers of DNA damage. People will always say, what about hormesis? What about hormesis? Hormesis has never been shown in interventional studies. There are interventional studies where they give people 0 vegetables or a ton of vegetables, 2 groups, for 4 to 11 weeks. And what you see at the end of those 4 to 11 weeks, you don't see hormesis. It doesn't work. The inflammatory markers, the markers of immunologic activation, the markers of DNA damage are the same in both groups, suggesting that plants are not having a hormetic effect, that plants don't have any benefit, that there's never been a benefit from an inflammatory, oxidative stress perspective demonstrated with plant interventions. And that is a radical concept. Most people are not aware of those studies. They are just shown the short-term myopic studies which show, oh, if you give sulforaphane, DNA damage goes down. Yeah, well, if you eat broccoli for 11 weeks, DNA damage doesn't even change. So there's a discordance there. People are only shown the microscopic studies. They're never shown the interventional studies, which suggest no benefit. And there are multiple studies like that. So hormesis, it's never been proven. And in fact, I think it's a net negative. I think the plants are harming us in ways that people are not aware of.
So don't you think that's kind of some sort of exercise? When we talk about hormesis, we also talk about stressing the body. There's like this notion, actually, now we're jumping into part 3 in a way. There's this notion that cells have to be stressed. A lot of clever people say that you need to stress the cells, otherwise they won't function very well. And so that these polyphenols and alkaloids and stuff like that would actually make the job. And you already said it doesn't, but like cold water exposure or sauna or exercise.
Yeah, I'll draw a distinction between things that are suggested as molecular hormetics and things that are environmental experiential hormetics. I think there's very good evidence that there is such thing as experiential hormetics and environmental hormetics. I think that cold exposure, cold swimming, exercise, sauna, these are environmental experiential hormetics. These are true. That paradigm holds up because you're not putting a molecule, but the idea of molecular hormesis is what I debate. I think the idea of molecular hormesis has been incorrectly applied. They're incorrectly applying the model of environmental hormesis to molecular hormesis. And I think, as I suggested, molecular hormesis doesn't hold up to the same sort of scrutiny that environmental hormesis does. They're not the same. And I don't think molecular hormesis actually even really exists. Okay. Humans can easily achieve optimal antioxidant status, and those studies would suggest exactly that. Humans can easily achieve optimal antioxidant status, optimal inflammatory status without presupposed molecular hermetics from plants. And that's been demonstrated time and time again in those studies.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So I would like to use the occasion to make another cut here. And in the last and third part, I want to ask you some questions. I want to talk with you about biophotons. I want to talk with you about the microbiome, Steven Gundry, medicinal mushrooms, and a lot more. Thank you for being here, Paul. Ciao. You are certainly aware of the fact that our sleep is probably the most important factor when it comes to health and regeneration. A good sleep is key for energy production, detoxification, brain health, and a lot more. The Oura Ring is probably the world's best sleep tracker. It's a tiny little ring that can track your deep sleep, your REM sleep, and even sophisticated parameters like night HRV and body temperature. I was able to identify a couple of sleep-related problems for myself and solve them with the help of the Oura Ring. The ring comes with a built-in airplane mode and does not emit any visible light during the night like some popular wristbands or smartwatches do. I simply love my Oura Ring. And the best part is, listeners of the Bio360 podcast now get a whopping $50 off. The only thing you got to do is follow the link in the description of the podcast, and the discount will be applied in the final checkout step. Sleep well.